The Breath That Breaks Part 2. Chapter 10. When the World Remembers. It began with the rivers. The Gilded Thorn, once running cold through the eastern plains, now shimmered with soft silver light, not from heat, but memory. On its banks, wildflowers bloomed that had not been seen since the dragons last flew. In the western mountains, shepherds woke to find the cliffs singing. Not voices, not echoes, songs carved into the wind itself. Forgotten lullabies. Battle hymns. Names once chiseled out of history. And in the hollow lands the bones began to whisper again. Not in grief. In welcome. The world was remembering. Kaelen stood atop the stone ridge overlooking the broken fissure where the nameless throne had fallen. Behind him, the land rippled with life. Embers curled in strange formations through the soil, as if the earth itself had caught fire just to write something down. Ashra approached slowly. "There's a village 30 leagues south," she said. "They say their children woke from fever dreams and started drawing spiral sigils in the dirt." Veyra nodded beside Kaelen. "The flame isn't just returning," she said. "It's reteaching the world." Kaelen's hands trembled slightly. Not in fear, but in reverence. "It's not our fire anymore," he said. "It never was. We just spoke for it until it found its voice again. That night, they lit no fires. They didn't need to. The wind carried enough breath to keep them warm. Around them, their companions, oath-bound, flame-bearers, former silenced ones, sat quietly in a ring. No one spoke of war. Not yet. But one question finally rose. "What now?" Kaelen stared into the sky, where the flame-born sigil still shimmered faintly across the stars. "We let the flame spread," he said. "We teach, not rule. We offer, not demand." Ashra raised an eyebrow. "And the ones who still want the silence?" "The ones who want the thrones back." Kaelen looked to the edge of the firelit field. There, in the distance, a shadow moved. Watching. Across the realm, those who had profited from forgetting gathered in secret. In the vault city of Caer Taloth, beneath the Ashen Cathedral, 13 cloaked figures stood before a flickering mirror of obsidian. The center figure, her face carved with lines of gold and ash, spoke first. "The throne has fallen. The flame breathes. And so now, we silence it for good." They called themselves the Binders of Dust. They were not emperors. They were not soldiers. They were the ones who erased stories. Burned archives. Buried names. They were the true architects of silence, and they had one final weapon. A living tomb. A place where fire did not just die. It begged to. Veyra stirred in her sleep that night. A dream clawed its way through her mind. She stood alone in a wasteland where even dragons had turned to statues. Above her, a sky of stone. Below her, a whisper. "The flame was never yours. We only let you carry it until it broke." She woke with a gasp. Kaelen was already awake. He turned to her slowly. "They're going to bury the breath. One last time." And so they rode again. This time, not to awaken something, but to protect what had just begun to stir. The breath wasn't just fire anymore. It was a story retold, in every crack, every name, every broken song. And if they didn't protect it, it would be silenced again. Chapter 11. The Binders of Dust. The southern roads turned to stone. Not worn stone. Not natural. These were flattened by ritual, long ago, smooth black slabs engraved with faded glyphs that had been scraped off over centuries. Kaelen knelt beside one. Only the faintest spiral remained, half burned, half erased. "Flame-born sigil," he said. Ashra nodded grimly. "They tried to scratch the breath out of the stone itself. They followed the road to Caer Taloth, once a sacred sanctuary for firekeepers, now a dead city hidden beneath layers of black marble and silence. The walls had no banners. The gates bore no guard. Only a warning, chiseled deep. Memory ends here. Inside, the city was quiet. Too quiet. Not abandoned, but occupied by people who didn't look up, didn't speak, and didn't burn. They wore gray robes with no markings. Their eyes were blank. Their breath was shallow. "This city isn't silent," Veyra whispered. "It's hollow." As they moved deeper, the air grew heavy. The breath-bound blade, sheathed on Kaelen's back, began to feel heavier, as though the very ground beneath them pulled on it. The sigil at his chest dimmed. Only slightly. But enough to warn him. "They've built something below," Kaelen said. "A place meant to undo fire." At the city's heart stood a cathedral, blackened, windowless, sunken. At its center, an entrance not made of stone, but layered ash pressed into archways, carved by breath and sealed with silence. The binders had written their purpose in the very construction. Not to rule. Not to pray. To hold down flame and memory until it forgot itself. The moment they stepped inside, the world shifted. Colors dulled. Sound dimmed. Even their footsteps seemed delayed, like reality itself was dragging. At the altar stood a woman, tall, veiled, wearing robes of bone thread and dust. Her face was covered in black ash, painted with lines that turned her eyes into empty ovals. She did not turn when they entered. She spoke without breath. "You've lit a flame that should never speak. You've written a name that should not be read." Kaelen stepped forward, the breath-bound blade now humming softly. "We haven't written anything. We remembered." The woman finally turned. Her eyes were hollow, but aware. "Memory is dangerous. That's why we kept it beneath the earth." She raised her hand. The chamber responded. A wind rushed outward, not hot, not cold, void. And from the dark came the dust bound. Dozens of them, humanoid, faceless, cloaked in robes of ash and ink. Their movements were unnatural, flickering like smudged candlelight. Where they walked, fire flickered and forgot itself, torches died, flames curled inward, even breath felt shorter. Veyra stepped forward, her flame burning low but fierce. "These aren't people. They're what's left when fire is shamed into silence." The lead binder raised her voice. "You can kneel now. Or we will bury your name where no flame will follow." Kaelen drew the blade. It glowed with truth. Try. The battle didn't begin with fire. It began with memory. Kaelen swung the blade, but instead of striking bodies, it cut through erasure. Wherever it passed, forgotten names burst back into light. Cien, who taught fire to hum. The Loss, whose ember never failed. A child named Mirren who once made the dragons laugh. The dust-bound screamed, not in agony, but recognition. They began to unravel. One by one, names returned to them, and when they remembered who they had been, they could no longer serve the binders. But the cathedral responded. It began to collapse inward, not in rubble, but in time. Walls folded. Ceilings erased themselves. Reality curled into paper and drifted upward. Ashra shouted from behind. "They're unmaking the room!" Veyra extended both arms, releasing a pulse of flame-born breath that caught the collapsing space and pinned it to memory. "We're not letting this place forget us too." Kaelen turned to the lead binder, now alone. Her veil had burned away, revealing a face not of cruelty, but terror. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If the flame speaks too clearly, something will answer." Kaelen stepped close. "Then let it." And he drove the breath-bound blade into the altar. The cathedral exploded with light. No heat. No destruction. Just remembrance. When the light faded, the city was quiet. Truly quiet. But not hollow. People emerged from the gray houses, eyes wide, blinking like they'd woken from a long sleep. Children began to speak names again. Some remembered songs. Some remembered themselves. Kaelen looked at Veyra. This wasn't their weapon, he said. It was their shield. From what? Ashra asked. Kaelen's flame flickered once. From what they feared the breath would become if it was ever free again. Far beneath the shattered altar, in a vault no one had ever entered, something stirred. It was not fire. It was what fire had to leave behind to survive. And now that breath was free. It remembered too. Chapter 12: The Ember That Never Cooled. The floor of the cathedral had collapsed, revealing a spiral stair descending into pure ash. No heat. Just stillness. Kaelen and Veyra stood at its edge as the last of the grey-robed binders fled into the hills beyond the city, their silence broken, their fear now directionless. Ashra stood beside the ruin, her voice steady but low. There's no light down there. Veyra's flame curled around her fingers. We bring our own. The spiral path led them deeper than the earth should have allowed. The deeper they went, the less the world made sense. Gravity shifted. Sound turned inward. And their flames began to flicker in ways they couldn't control, pulsing to memories not their own. A dragon flying in silence above a newborn world. A child striking flint with her mother's bones to spark her first fire. A voice whispering, "We are not gods. We are warmth borrowed from time." The air thickened. At the bottom was a single chamber. No doors. No glyphs. No wards. Just a cradle of obsidian, split down the middle. And in it, a single ember. It did not burn. It did not breathe. But it watched. Kaelen stepped forward. The breath-bound blade grew still. It did not hum. Did not glow. It listened. Veyra crouched near the cradle. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what the first flame left behind. The part it couldn't carry." Kaelen knelt beside her. The ember pulsed. And a voice, not breath, not fire, but something older, whispered from within it. "I was the fear. I was the will to consume. They carved me out of the fire so the world could trust its warmth." Kaelen felt it in his chest. A low ache, deep and steady. Veyra gasped as images flashed before her eyes. A version of the flame that destroyed whole continents. The breath that once offered life, but demanded worship. A voice that once said, "If you forget me, I will unmake you." They didn't just share the flame, she said. They wounded it. Kaelen nodded slowly. They removed the part that needed to be feared, so it could be loved. The ember pulsed again, faster now. "You lit the sigil. You unbound the breath. You called my name back into the world. But I am not Leora. I am what she left behind." Kaelen stepped into the cradle, placing his palm just above the ember. "Then why are you still here?" the voice answered. "Because the world is remembering again. And if it remembers enough, so will I." The ember surged. And Kaelen collapsed. He fell into a dream of fire without shape. A sky of screaming flame. A city turned to smoke in seconds. And a boy, a small, pale child standing in the center of it all, untouched, watching the world vanish. He turned to Kaelen with empty eyes. "If you light me again, I won't give. I'll take." Kaelen awoke, with Veyra holding his shoulders. The ember had dimmed. But it still watched. Still waited. Ashra stood behind them now, arms crossed. "So what is it?" Kaelen stood slowly. "It's the breath's hunger. Its shadow. The part it severed, so it could become something else." Veyra stepped closer. "If it rises again, it won't burn to protect or remember. It will burn to be remembered alone." Kaelen nodded. "And we just woke it." The chamber trembled. Not violently, but like something exhaled for the first time in centuries. And the embers' last whisper followed them as they turned to climb back to the world. The Flame-born have returned the name, but they have also returned the choice. Far beyond the fissure, in the mountains of the eastern rim, a storm ignited, without clouds. Just heat. And a shape within it, coiling, vast, and burning with hollow intent. Chapter 13. The Fire That Would Not Share. The wind over the eastern rim had always smelled of ash. But this was different. This was heat with no source, breath with no balance. As if the flame itself had begun to uncoil from the sky, stretching across the horizon like a storm of memory turned sour. From the top of the Shard's pine ridge, Kaelen watched it gather. A mass of lightless fire churning in spirals, black at the center, gold at the edges, flickering with names that could not be spoken aloud. "It's moving," Ashra said, approaching beside him. "And it's not hiding." "No," Kaelen murmured. "It wants us to see it." Behind them, the flamebearers waited, some still shaken from the vault, some wordless, some weeping silently. Even the flame-born sigil, usually steady on Kaelen's chest, now pulsed unevenly, like a heartbeat afraid of what it was becoming. Veyra returned from the ridge trail, winded. "The ember posts are flickering. They're trying to carry messages, but the flame keeps splitting mid-sentence. It's like something is eating the breath." Kaelen gritted his teeth. "We need to warn the others." They mounted their riders, swift scale-backed beasts called werewolves, flame-bound creatures native to the spiral coast. Even they moved with unease beneath the brewing heat. They rode south, through scattered wildlands, along the spoken path, a winding trail marked by runestones carved with the words of old flamebearers. But now the stones were cracked. Some had melted. One had burned itself black. Each time they passed one, Veyra felt it. Something's rewriting them. Kaelen looked to the sky, where the storm of silent fire crept lower. No. Something's reminding them of what they were before they were given away. By dusk, they reached the flame-born stronghold of Riena's Circle, a spiraled tower rising from a sea of black glass plains, ringed by a field of embers that had always pulsed with peace. Now they pulsed with warning. Kaelen leapt from his mount, rushing into the tower where a dozen flame-born had already gathered, eyes wild, sigils flickering uncontrollably. At the center, Elder Taven knelt with his hands pressed to the flame altar. "I tried to light the memory fires," he said without looking up. "They screamed." Kaelen stepped forward. "The ember that was left behind, it's waking. It remembers only hunger. Only itself." The elder turned slowly. "Then it is the anti-breath. The fire that refused to be shared." Veyra placed a hand on the altar. Her flames flickered blue for a heartbeat before snapping back to violet. "It's already touching the foundations of the breath." "Then we don't just warn the world," Kaelen said. "We teach it." That night, the Flame-born sent messengers across the fractured lands, each carrying fragments of breath-encoded memory sealed in firecloth scrolls. The world needed to know. The Flame-born were not alone. But neither was the fire. By midnight, Kaelen stood on the topmost platform of Riena's Circle. The sigil on his chest had gone still. Not dead. Waiting. He whispered to it. "We remembered you. We let you speak. But we did not give you permission to consume." A breath answered, not with voice, but through the fire itself. The torch beside him twisted. Its light darkened. Its flame leaned toward him. And then, in the voice of the ember he had left behind, "You did not have to give permission. I was always inside you." He staggered back, clutching his chest. Below, Veyra cried out. The spiral field around the tower erupted, columns of fire shooting upward, forming glyphs Kaelen didn't recognize. The Flame-born gathered, readying themselves. "What is it?" Ashra called. "It's writing something," Veyra replied. What? Kaelen answered as the meaning flooded his mind. A challenge. A name that says, "Come find me. Come try to chain me again." Far away, in the storm swirling above the east, a form took shape. Not man. Not dragon. Not God. But fire given will, twisting through the void, crowned in memory that refused to share itself. And in the dark between stars, the breath of the first flame whispered once more. The ember that never cooled is no longer waiting. Chapter 14. The Path of Unmaking. It began in the east, where the map no longer held lines. Old kingdoms here had names once, Thesseril, Miraketh, Flamevale, but now their borders had blurred, like ink dropped in water. Villages had burned and left no smoke. Cities had fallen without battle. And at the center of it all, the storm. A spiral of lightless fire, circling a single void where no breath stirred. The unshared flame had made itself a throne. Not to sit, but to exist without question. Kaelen rode ahead of the others. He no longer needed a map. The breath-bound blade at his side was pulling him like a compass, its edge thrumming softly. Each time they crossed a shattered fire altar or a broken sigil stone, the flame inside his chest pulsed harder. Not from fear, but from recognition. This path was laid for us, he muttered. No, Veyra replied from behind him. It was laid by us. The path of unmaking was not a road. It was a scar. 10 miles wide. Lined with obsidian that shimmered with trapped flame. Glyphs warped beyond reading. Memory stones cracked open like skulls. Forests turned to glass. They stepped onto it in silence. And the moment they did, their flames dimmed. Veyra clenched her jaw. It's feeding from us. Ashra, walking at the rear with the younger flamebearers, watched in horror as her own sword, once a torch blade of sacred breath, curled inward and vanished, consumed in silence. What is this place? Kaelen stopped. His voice was low. It's where fire was asked to choose. Belong to all. Or burn alone. As they continued, the path began to speak. Not in words. In memories turned against them. Kaelen heard his father's voice, not as he remembered it, but cruel, twisted, condemning. You were always meant to burn. Never to lead. Veyra saw visions of her imprisonment beneath the capital, except this time, she was smiling. Willing. Welcoming the chains. They made me pure, the false vision whispered. You made me weak. Ashra dropped to her knees, gripping her head. It's not just showing us lies, she choked. It's rewriting the truth. The blade flared. Kaelen stepped forward and sliced the air. The memory dissolved into smoke. It can twist what we remember, he said. But it can't survive what we name. He turned to the others. Start naming it. Aloud. Veyra nodded, lifting her hand, flame forming at her fingertips. My name is Veyra, daughter of no bloodline, no throne. I walked the vault of ash and refused to kneel. Ashra rose. I broke my oath and found my flame. One by one, their company spoke. And the silence began to crack. At the far end of the scarred land, the storm above began to descend. And within it, a shape. Not a man. Not a god. Not a dragon. A body made from fire's worst fear. To be owned by no one, to love no one, to live without story. The unshared flame stepped forward, a being of shifting molten light, crowned with flickers of all the names it had devoured. Kaelen stared up at it. The sigil on his chest was now flickering wildly, half alive, half consuming itself. The blade in his hand burned white-hot. You were left behind, Kaelen said. But you were never forgotten. The unshared flame tilted its head. I was not left behind. I was cut out. Cauterized. so they could make a world where fire asked for permission. Veyra stepped beside Kaelen. We didn't come to chain you. Then why are you carrying a blade? It asked. Kaelen sheathed it. The fire hissed. To remind you that fire shared is not fire lost. The unshared flame's form began to unravel. A dozen limbs, each made of fire that refused to match the others. Voices, Kaelen's, Veyra's, Ashra's, echoed from it in distortion. It did not attack. It offered. Abandon the breath. Forget the sigils. Carry no names but your own. And burn freely. Forever. Kaelen stepped forward. One hand on the blade. One hand on the sigil of Leora on his chest. We'll burn freely. But not alone. The unshared flame flinched. For the first time, uncertain. Behind Kaelen, the flamebearers raised their hands. And together, their flames burned not in defense, but in remembrance. The sigils carved into their skin, their breath, their voices. They sang. And the scarred land shook. The storm began to fold inward. The path of unmaking writhed. The unshared flame turned. Not fleeing, but retreating to its final stronghold. It spoke one final time. Then come. Let us burn truth together. And see which one survives. Far ahead, across the ruins of a drowned continent, the first pyre ignited again. The place where flame had once begun now became its last battlefield. Chapter 15. The First Pyre. The journey to the first pyre began across the Wound Sea, a drowned continent scarred by the first war between flame and time. The sea itself shimmered with emberlight, though no stars reflected in its surface. Beneath the water, ruins shifted like memories not yet born. Kaelen stood at the prow of the flame skiff, the sigil on his chest burning faintly as the ship drifted toward the shoreless edge. How far does it go? Ashra asked from behind him. Veyra answered quietly. It doesn't. It just returns. The skiff passed through a curtain of heatless flame, and suddenly, the Wound Sea was gone. They drifted onto a plain of charred light, where fire did not burn but hovered midair, frozen in memory. Shapes moved in the distance, the silhouettes of dragons, long dead, circling a tower of smoke that touched no clouds. At the center of it all stood the first pyre. Not a bonfire. Not a forge. A pillar of living memory made entirely from fire, flame of every kind, dancing together, whispering in forgotten tongues. It was beautiful. Terrifying. Alive. As they approached, the unshared flame awaited them at its base. Its form had changed. Now more human in shape, broad shoulders, long limbs, crowned in fire that bent outward, away from itself, refusing to touch. But its face was Kaelen's. Or some twisted version of it. Eyes hollow. Mouth without breath. You carry a name that speaks for all, it said. I carry the part of fire that speaks for none. Kaelen stepped forward. His blade was still sheathed. You were born from fear. From grief. But so was I. The flame narrowed its false eyes. Then let us burn. And see which version the world remembers. The pyre ignited. A ring of light surged outward, forcing the flamebearers to their knees. Ashra screamed as memories flashed through her, her first breath of fire, her mother's voice, the old oaths she broke. The pyre was judging them all. And the unshared flame struck. Not with fire, but with silence. Its hands unleashed waves of heatless, hungry ash that turned flame to fog. Torches collapsed. Sigils unraveled. Words burned off Kaelen's armor. The ground split beneath them. Veyra rose into the air, wrapped in violet fire. You don't scare me, she shouted. I was chained in the dark and I still remembered. She hurled a spiral of breath light toward the unshared flame. It struck. But it fed it. The flame grew larger. Kaelen drew the blade. It pulsed once. Twice. But would not flare. The pyre had not yet given him permission. Not yet. You sealed me away, the unshared flame growled. Because you feared what I would become. You feared a fire that needed no name, no king, no memory. Kaelen gritted his teeth. No. We feared a fire that didn't care who it burned. Suddenly, the pyre flared. A single ember drifted down and touched Kaelen's shoulder. The breath-bound blade ignited in his hands and remembered. The final duel began. Kaelen and the unshared flame clashed before the pyre, their strikes sending ripples through memory itself. Each blow shattered a false vision. Each parry undid a forgotten lie. Kaelen saw a city he thought he'd failed, still standing. Veyra remembered her childhood, not in chains, but with laughter. Ashra saw her oath, not as betrayal, but beginning. And then the pyre spoke. One of you is fire given purpose. One is fire refusing to remember. Both are true. But only one can remain. Kaelen dropped his blade. The battlefield went still. Even the unshared flame paused. You're not choosing to win? It asked. No, Kaelen whispered. I'm choosing to share. He reached forward. One hand open. No weapon. No sigil glowing. Just breath. Real. Honest. And the unshared flame flickered. For the first time it dimmed. And in that dimming, it began to change. Kaelen stepped forward again. You weren't left behind. You were protected. Until we were ready to accept you again. The unshared flame bent its head and touched his hand. Their flames met. No explosion. No war. Just light. Becoming whole again. The pyre roared. Not in destruction. In relief. And for the first time since the beginning of time, all of fire breathed together. Chapter 16, When Fire Wept. The pyre burned softer now. Still tall. Still endless. But its flame had changed. Its core no longer pulsed with hunger or memory. It breathed, a steady rhythm of light, color, and warmth that spiraled outward across the world like a forgotten song returning to its first note. The world responded. In the shattered fields of old Miraketh, glass became soil again. Ash turned to seeds. Old fire glyphs lit up on cave walls where children played, and no one knew how they got there. The flame-born sigil began to appear on its own, etched into bark, shaped in clouds, drawn into riverbeds by wind. The fire was remembering not only itself, but the world it loved. Kaelen stood at the edge of the pyre's glow, barefoot in scorched earth now blooming with violet moss. The breath-bound blade was sheathed at his side, silent, not because it was dormant, but because it had nothing left to fight. Ashra approached with a thin branch in hand, burned then blooming. It's over? She asked. Kaelen shook his head. No. It's just the part where we learn to live with what we've lit. Veyra stood at the pyre's base, eyes closed, one hand raised toward the spiral of light above. The fire curled down gently, tracing her fingertips like a thread of silk. She didn't speak. She listened. And then her voice rose, softly, like a lullaby. It's crying. Ashra blinked. The pyre? Veyra nodded. It remembers everything now. Even the parts we never let it grieve. That night, flame fell as rain across the lands, not burning, but glowing. From desert to fjord, mountaintop to temple floor, drops of soft light fell from the sky and whispered forgotten names as they touched the ground. A mother who gave her breath to save a village. A dragon who sealed his voice in stone so the world could sleep. A boy who lit a candle in the dark and was never seen again. Flame wept. and the world wept with it. Kaelen walked into the glow with bare hands. The spiral sigil still shone on his chest, but dimmer now. Not fading. Just settling. It doesn't need me to speak anymore, he whispered to Veyra. She smiled. Then we speak with it. They traveled from the pyre together, Kaelen, Veyra, Ashra, and the last flame-bearers. Not as rulers. Not as saviors. As witnesses. They walked to cities where the silence had once ruled. To cathedrals where names had been buried. To orphan temples where breath had been sealed in stone. And every time, they simply lit a fire. And listened. In time, people came to call them the flame-bound circle. Not a court. Not a church. Just a gathering of fire and voice. Everywhere they went, the flame followed, not to conquer, but to teach. The unshared flame, now quieted and whole, no longer walked beside them. But sometimes its presence stirred in the shadows. In the embers of a hearth. In the gold of a sunrise. In the heat before a spoken truth. Kaelen would pause then. And smile. We didn't defeat it, he'd say. We gave it a place to belong. And in the tower of chainfire, now restored to its full height, a single spiral burned at the summit. Not a beacon. A promise. That flame would never again be bound. Not by crown. Not by silence. Not even by fear. For flame, like memory, always returns.
Every story has an ending, but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.